Okay, welcome to using PBS resources to support social and emotional learning. If you are just joining us, this webinar is part of a 3-webinar series that has been a collaborative effort here with PAIU and Pennsylvania PBS. We had 2 previous webinars on 2 previous weeks, and our co-presenters from those webinars are present with us as well. Those webinars 2 weeks ago was on PBS broadcasted materials and how to use those, and last week was on PBS learning media. So we're really excited to have you guys join us today for social and emotional learning. This particular presentation is brought to you by, in specific, Jen. I don't know if you would like to speak a little bit.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Jen Balda from WITF, which is the local PBS TV station here in the Harrisburg region. And I'm an education project coordinator with a background of instructional aid for kindergarten for many years. So more of the early learners area. So I'm glad to be able to join you today, and I thank you for your patience and understanding.
I'm Nicole Bond. I'm the Educational Technology Specialist here at Lincoln Intermediate Unit 12. And I think that Sue and Lauren should also introduce themselves because they've been part of our collaborative effort with WITF to help support our PBS initiatives here at the state.
I can go first. Hi, my name is Lauren Deal. I am the supervisor for curriculum and instruction at the Lancaster Lebanon Intermediate Unit, and I was the host of last week's webinar. So welcome, everybody.
And my name is Sue Voigt. I am an educational services supervisor at the Capital Area Intermediate Unit located outside of Harrisburg. And I was the presenter for the PBS on-air broadcasting webinar. Welcome.
Thanks, guys. So if you haven't been at our previous webinars, I should probably share with you that we've been all working together to help support our districts, and specifically a lot of our students who may not have access to materials here moving forward. And as we're sharing materials today, we want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to reach out, if you're not necessarily in our IU areas, to reach out to any IU representatives that you might have, because all of the IUs in the state are working collaboratively with your local PBS stations. We do have a special guest who's going to be joining us today, which I think Jen is going to.
Yeah, I'll be happy to introduce. Yes, we have a great special guest. It's Chris Loggins. He's the supervising producer for Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and which is out of the Fred Rogers Productions in Pittsburgh in our own state of Pennsylvania. So it's wonderful that he'll be joining us. He's going to kind of give us a little brief overview of what goes into making Daniel Tiger Neighborhood and how social emotional learning is the central key part of that, and how they address children's big feelings. So we're looking forward to meeting Chris here in a little bit.
Okay, so we're going to start right into the social emotional learning components, and then we'll be getting right into PBS and what PBS is about and where we can find all of the great resources that PBS has to support our learners, whether they're in our classrooms or partially in our classrooms or not in our classrooms at all, and what we can do to help support them. So I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you haven't realized yet, you're in a webinar room and not a meeting room in Zoom, and it's a little bit different, to find the chat. It will be at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to find the chat and open it. I'm going to encourage you to make sure in the To panel that you select all panelists and attendees. And over the next couple of slides, Jen's going to talk a little bit about PBS, and I would like you to try to think about what importance SEL is going to have in your classroom moving into the fall, and as this situation is fluid and constantly changing, why you think that social emotional learning might be important, or what importance it might have in particular this fall in the chat. And I'm going to let Jen talk a little bit about PBS.
Okay. Great. When we think about PBS, it is a nationally acclaimed resource, fully research-based. There is a substantial amount of research available, both independent and by the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, that supports what we educators do. But more importantly is that there is a perception among families that PBS is a trusted resource for them. From an educator perspective, PBS supplements and enhances everything that we are doing in the classroom. And so when we are dealing with issues of access, such as families not having access to the internet, on-air resources become even more vital to be able to deliver content to students and families. The next slide is a really colorful graphic that has some great stats. Nationally, 77% of children ages 2 to 8 years old watch PBS regularly. It is the #1 educational brand, and that's based on families' feelings and perceptions. Research has also shown significant gains in math and language development for young children who regularly watch PBS programming. But what is even more relevant for us educators is that the model that PBS uses is really unique compared to other children's programming. The educational content is central. It is the key piece. And then the producers and the developers of the show work on how to make that content engaging, entertaining, and fun. And I think when Chris Loggins joins us in a bit, he can briefly tell us about this process when working on the show, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. PBS resources reach learners of all ages. It's not just for young learners ages 2 to 8. There's all kinds of excellent educational programming and resources for middle and high school learners and adults of all ages that cover content areas from science to the arts and everything in between. For example, Nicole will show some social and emotional resources later on that are specifically designed for older learners. PBS Kids itself does a really good job translating the program to the content. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the content is the central piece. And this schedule grid just shows you clearly how the programming falls into our content areas. And you can see here we outline the shows that specifically focus on social and emotional learning.
So I'm going to say thanks, Mary, for giving me your feedback in the chat. It definitely sounds like finding the right social and emotional learning tools is going to be super important to you, and the ability to find resources that are going to be able to use specifically with your students is going to be very important. So hopefully we will be able to share some resources today which are going to help meet those needs. So today when we're going over different topics, we're going to be focusing on what social emotional learning really is. We are going to be looking at what is available as far as content is concerned from PBS, as well as where it is appropriate, grade level, at what age group, grade level, and where you might even work it into your content areas. We're going to talk a little bit about when to use social emotional resources, social emotional learning resources. And then we're also going to share with you some great resources that are family facing. When we start to think about how we might be able to support the caregiver who is trying to help a student at home with social emotional learning, there are some fantastic resources that are out there from PBS. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how we might be able to use some of these resources before we move into them themselves. So looking at this fall, we are really looking at a smattering of any number of options, and really we have to be looking at the fact that we might have to pivot, that what we think we might be doing, whether it's face-to-face, online, or hybrid, it is subject to change very, very, very quickly. So when we start to look at our media resources that we come across here in PBS that are specifically built for these social emotional learning needs, we need to ask ourselves, how is this tool best used? So when we're talking about online instruction, this could easily be a tool that you share with students, perhaps before you have a synchronous online meeting, or it could be a tool that you share with students and then ask them perhaps to go into a Flipgrid and give you a response on how they're feeling or how they handle something. So think about how this tool could be used to share content about social emotional learning. That would be one way. Additionally, like face-to-face instruction, you might share it with the entire class and have a whole class discussion. Or if you have part of the class and part of the class might be live streaming, you can still share it with both and have that class discussion. So when we think about how we teach using social emotional learning, we typically talk about it from 3 different perspectives. The first is explicit instruction. That's when our goal really is the social emotional learning component. We're going to talk about empathy today, guys. Let's watch a video about empathy. What do we know about empathy? How can we apply empathy? Where have you seen empathy in your lives? So that's when it's explicit instruction. When it's academic integration, we're really looking at what our content possibly is or what our goal for learning possibly is. So for me, I spent 13 years teaching English language arts. So when I think about that, I think about how I can talk about, say, empathy when we're doing a character analysis. When we're reading a story and I say, is that really the greatest decision that that character made? Or why do you think that character made that decision? That's kind of how we can pull SEL into our content areas. In science class, for example, when you talk about reporting data, what's the ethical way to report data? That's a social emotional learning component. So when we think about social emotional learning, sometimes we talk about it explicitly, simply teaching it as it is, how we can integrate it into our subject or content areas, and then lastly, behavioral reflection. So sometimes our students, or in my case, the kids, don't necessarily make the best behavioral decision. And they make a bad decision or they're not thinking something all the way through. Having these tools handy so that you can grab that video so that there's a reflection piece for that student after maybe they've not made a great decision or they need to think about the next decision that they need to make. And having the short video or short activity that you can find here in PBS Learning Media is going to be a great way to help build that behavioral reflection piece. So I like to think of that. I like to think of this resource as a little bit of like a toolbox for that classroom management and behavioral reflection to help students really think about the choices that they're making and what their next steps are going to be. So when we define social emotional learning, we have to go to CASEL. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and it is pretty much the touchstone for all social emotional learning. It was formed in 1994 with a goal of establishing high-quality, evidence-based social and emotional learning as an essential part from preschool all the way through high school education. So that's super important. They define social emotional learning as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and then make responsible decisions. And when we talk about social emotional learning, a lot of times we'll also come back to Maslow's hierarchy. And when we think about social emotional learning, we start to enter it right here in the safety needs section, that personal security into the love and belonging, into the esteem, and the self-actualization. And I know often as educators, we think to ourselves, you know, Maslow's hierarchy, you have to do Maslow before Bloom, Maslow before Bloom. So this is part of us helping make sure we do Maslow before Bloom. So CASEL's 5 core competencies are this, and this is great because in PBS, a lot of their resources are mapped right to these 5 core competencies. So we have self-awareness, which is the idea of IDing your emotions, accurate self-perception, IDing your strengths, having self-confidence, self-efficacy. Self-management, which I think, honestly, when I think about online learning and the potential of our students to have to do online or hybrid learning, it's that idea of impulse control, stress management, self-discipline, self-motivation, goal setting, and organizational skills. So that one, honestly, I think is one of the biggest ones when we're really facing that pivot coming this fall, if that pivot is coming in whatever direction it's occurring. Social awareness is the idea of perspective taking, empathy, appreciating diversity and respect for others. You have your relationship skills. That's your communication, your social engagement, your relationship building, and your teamwork. And lastly, responsible decision making. So identifying a problem, analyzing situations and how to best solve those problems, evaluating, taking time to reflect, and ethical responsibility. And I think I may have timed this just perfectly, as I think that Chris has joined us.
Oh, yes, I'm here.
Well,
Perfect timing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastic.
All right. Well, you may have already gone over this, but I'm here to talk a little bit about the resources we have at from Fred Rogers Productions, specifically Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. I'm the producer of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood for Fred Rogers Productions in Pittsburgh. But before I get into all of that, I just wanted to thank all of the educators who may be watching for all that you're doing to prepare or right now start a new school year in these difficult times. So thank you all. But I thought I would start by talking a little bit about the company for people who might not be familiar with Fred Rogers Productions. We're based in Pittsburgh, like I said, and the company was started by Fred Rogers to make Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And for many, many years, that's all the company did. And the show was filmed at WQED Studios, which is a local public television station in Pittsburgh. But as the years progressed, the show went out of production, and sadly, Mr. Rogers passed away. But back in around 2011, we started talking about going back into production and making a new show. And we were inspired by Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to make Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. And at that time, we connected with Angela Santamero and her team at what is now called 9 Store US. Angela Santamero is the creator of Daniel Tiger's, not Daniel Tiger's, she is the creator of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, but she had created Blue's Clues before that. And she said that Mr. Rogers was one of her influences. And if you look at Blue's Clues, there's a lot of interaction with the home viewer in that show, and she got that directly from Mr. Rogers. But we decided with her to animate the neighborhood of make-believe and bring back some of the familiar puppets from the neighborhood of make-believe. And this show is a social and emotional themed show focusing on Daniel Tiger, who is 4 years old and lives in the neighborhood of make-believe. And so if you're familiar with the show, you've seen a lot of the strategies. We call them strategies. They're the little songs in the episodes. And they all have to do with a social emotional lesson or strategy or something that you can do when you're feeling a certain way or you need help calming yourself, things like that. And we work closely with a team of PAIU development experts on all of the scripts for the show. We see several rounds of scripts, and we go over these little strategy songs or hooks over and over and over again to get the wording just right. Many of our advisors who are child development experts worked with Mr. Rogers on his show. And I think that is a sort of a secret ingredient to Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, that strong connection to Mr. Rogers. We're working with people who learned from him personally. And we also work with a team of talented writers who bring the stories to life in an entertaining way. And I have to also mention the music because that is a huge and important part of making these strategies hopefully stick with the young viewers who watch the show. The show is designed for children 2 to 4 years old. And I never get tired of hearing from fans of the show who email us or write us saying, I saw my child using the sharing strategy or the mad feeling strategy. That is the ultimate goal, is to give children empowerment, and hopefully they'll pick up something from the show that helps them when they find themselves in a situation similar to something that Daniel experiences in the show. So those are the sort of nuts and bolts of how we craft the show. I could get into a little bit more detail if anyone has any further questions. But we have several resources as well, in addition to the show that airs on PBS Kids that you may want to check out. And one that I wanted to bring particular attention to is an app called Daniel Tiger for Parents. It's a free app, and it's available on Google and Apple products, Android and Apple. And it's like having a library of Daniel strategies in your pocket. So we went through and chose some of the most useful strategies from the show. We put them into the app along with clips of the characters using the strategies. But not only that, each one comes with a tip from our experts about why it was done the way it was or how it's helpful. And I don't remember if I said this, but it's available in both Spanish and English. So I have it on my phone, and I find myself using it a lot. It's a nice resource. So I wanted to point that one out for people. But we have several other apps as well, in addition to iTunes albums featuring music from the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions that they want to put in the chat for Chris while he's here talking about the show? We're going to go out actually to Daniel Tiger here in a moment.
Yeah, and I'll stick around as the questions come in. So I'm happy to answer any questions that people put in the chat box.
Fantastic. Well, you may want to add in anything. I'm going to go out here to Daniel Tiger, and we're actually going to look at some strategy songs. You'll notice down here that it aligns to the CASTLE competencies that I was just talking about, that responsible decision making, self-awareness, et cetera, et cetera.
As Chris highlighted, Daniel Tiger uses strategy songs to help young children process and problem solve these social and emotional situations. And so these strategy songs are so useful for teaching moments and for teachers and caregivers and parents. You can use them to help our young learners think and reflect about these feelings and situations after viewing a video clip or an interactive resource such as this one, which can be found on PBS Learning Media. And then hopefully reinforcing these strategies throughout their learning day and at home. This one in particular is about saying I'm sorry is the first step, demonstrating to young children that while saying sorry is important and necessary, it's the follow-up and what we do after that makes saying sorry just much more meaningful and significant. I'm sorry is the first step, and how can I help? These songs used as a reminder or a prompt open the door to build on so many social and emotional skills, including but not limited to self-regulation and empathy. I do want to point out that at the bottom of the video clip where it says about and support materials and standards, be sure to always look for supplement materials and resources there. These can often be shared with your students' families and caregivers. So if you click on support materials, there's a great article that gives suggestions and tips on how to teach children to be intentional when using I'm sorry. So that's just one example of the many, many resources on PBS Learning Media.
See a question.
Any questions on that? Yeah.
I see a question in the Q&A. Are there online social stories related to Daniel Tiger that we can use with the songs? My students are middle school.
Middle school?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was just thinking that we do have online storybooks that are on our website, which is pbskids.org/Daniel. And they are read out loud by Daniel. Daniel's narrating the stories. They don't have songs, they have simple animations, but if you wanted to develop a lesson plan where you have the song separately and then read the storybook online, you could do that. It might be a little bit, I don't know if middle schoolers would find it all that entertaining, but perhaps.
So that might be a solution. I'm also going to show some other PBS learning resources that might meet your needs too, Mary.
I did think of one more thing that I just wanted to mention about how the show comes together. In addition to working with those experts, we also test the stories with children. So while we're scripting, we'll take the script out into an early learning center and read the story with children, and researchers will monitor for retention and comprehension, among other things. But we're also learning from children about what works best for them, and that goes into the show.
Thanks so much, Chris. I have someone asking for the URL again. I'm not sure if maybe if Sue or Lauren could grab it and put it in the chat, that would be fantastic.
And if Chris, if you could just say that again, I think I have the right one, but I want to be sure.
Yeah, the one I mentioned was pbskids.org/Daniel. And if you can't remember that, you can also just go to the PBS Kids website, and they have this cool little wheel at the bottom of the page there, and you can just spin around until you see Daniel and click on him, and it'll take you to the same place.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And if you aren't familiar with the PBS Kids website, I do know that Sue on our first webinar, I believe, walked everyone through how to use that PBS Kids website pretty thoroughly. So if you need kind of a walkthrough again, we'll be sharing out this particular webinar, and I'll probably share out the other two as well, so folks have access to all three of our webinars at the same time.
Okay. And I see the comment from Mary clarifying about her students, and I appreciate that to know that, yeah, these will be helpful resources for that group of children.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
So as we keep moving, I'm going to show you some of the other resources that we have here on PBS Learning.
Sure. Yeah. So, so that Daniel Tiger video clip that we just saw is just an example of the wealth of resources available just on the PBS Learning Media website alone. There's actually a whole section devoted to social and emotional learning for early learners, and it is located under the general subject area called preschool. And then within that are subject areas that are actually aligned with the CASEL competencies. So Nicole is going to demonstrate how to navigate there with another example of a practical resource that you can use in the classroom. So I'm going to go back to you, Nicole.
I think it was under self-management. Okay, so you can kind of search over here using this sidebar. You can also go into the grades. So I know this says preschool and social emotional development, but you might be surprised because some of these pieces, while they say pre-K, some of them go up to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So I would just encourage you, if you are in here and thinking social emotional, some of the resources that are listed in under preschool do go pre-K through 5th grade. I am specifically going to go in here because you can't pass up Ed Sheeran, and I live in 2 different worlds. So this is an example of a piece that you might use in your classroom. And for me, I'm thinking beginning of the year when we're dealing with, or possibly if you find that you have to pivot to online, to address some of those situations that are in class. So I'm going to play hopefully just a little smidge here of Ed with the Sesame Street characters singing this song.
I live in 2 different worlds, like lots of other boys and girls. One's at home with my family, the other school where I learn all I can be. I live in 2 different worlds. I can speak whenever I please. I can talk real loud and shoot the breeze. So I raise my hand in the air when there's something that I want to share. We go. We go. We go. We go. I live in 2 different worlds. I live in 2 different worlds. A home I can.
So to give you an idea, the song's almost over, but it talks about the 2 different worlds of being at home and being at school, and how certain things that you do at home are not necessarily great decisions, or how things go at school. And it might be totally okay at home, but your school person, your school personality, your school side is different, and we interact differently. So I think about it, looking at what we're looking at in the fall, and I think what a great way to have a conversation about how at this point we don't really live in 2 different worlds. Some of us might be looking at 3 different worlds, or we might look at this and say it's 2 different worlds, but at school we're going to do things differently now because we're virtually learning in some way like that. So using something like this as a way to activate and have students really consider, how is this world of virtual online learning different? So if we were to maybe do a comparison, like this is what I'm allowed to do at home, this is what we would do at school, and this is what I do when I'm online or learning in a hybrid format. And really, I think I see this song being used well above pre-K. You could easily use this all the way through elementary and into middle school with students to have that conversation about self-management and what those 2, 3, potentially 4 different worlds might be like, and how we maybe need to modify our behavior depending on which situation we're in and how that's important. So there's a lot of really great resources in that preschool section that I really want to encourage you to go in and check out when you have the opportunity. The next resource that I want to show you, and again, I'm moving a little fast, but in an effort of time, I want to make sure that we finish at 4:15, is something called the AIM Buddy Project. Now, this is a fantastic project. I like that there are like little interactive books that are built into this particular project. I'm going to click down here, if I can get my mouse back. There. Click down here into the social emotional character development curriculum. So the AIM Buddy Project is an entire curriculum of social emotional learning resources. And the idea behind this particular project is that you would buddy students up. Now, I know some of us are like, well, we can't have students in the same room close to each other talking. We have 6 feet of distance, we have masks. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to really explore how you can still have students build community even if they maybe can't sit at the same table across from each other, or how you can have perhaps maybe an older elementary school student help a younger elementary school student with the social emotional learning concepts that are in here. So if I go into the educator's guide and videos, all of these are resources just aimed at educators, and it's pages and pages and pages of videos and resources. So if I go into this guide right here, you'll see the complete guide and about the program and the little buddy sessions. So the idea of the little buddy sessions would be that you would have a younger elementary school student possibly pairing up with an older elementary school student, and together they would be looking at these interactive books, which I'm going to show you in a moment, to talk about and discuss the concepts, the social emotional learning concepts or the character development concept that is related to it. So it's a downloadable piece that will go into greater detail. And there's tons of support materials in here, including research findings associated with it, a roadmap. So it's really a fairly comprehensive curriculum. So I'm going to go back here to the classroom media section, because this is the part that I think is great. This isn't just a video, this is an interactive media piece. So I'm going to go into the empathy one, because it is very much like an interactive comic book. So it works for the older kids, but it will also work for your younger kids. So you'll see.
Man, is it cold out there?
Not only does
I know, my ears are still frozen.
Not only does it give us the text, but it then reads it out loud. So I like to imagine, what if I had a group of students and I was able to break out students into breakout rooms where students could click through this together and talk about what's going on.
What you need is a pair of genuine yak wool earmuffs. Where would I get those? From a Tibetan pen pal, if you are lucky enough to have one. My friend Tenzin just sent me this. Wow, what is that you're wearing? My new sweater. And it's made from a yak. You mean yaks? They must have used a couple of them. It's pretty big on you. Hey, you know what? It kind of makes you look like a big sheepdog.
So you get the idea. Essentially what happens is Arthur doesn't let that joke go, that she looks like a sheepdog, and keeps it running throughout the entire story to the point where she's upset with him, and all of her friends are upset with him as well, because she's already asked him to stop. and he won't stop with the joke, and he thinks he's being so funny, and he doesn't realize that it's not funny to anybody else anymore, and it looks like bullying, and he gets into trouble with his teacher for it. So it's a fantastic example that while I say you can say it might work for younger elementary, I definitely know some middle school students who could benefit from looking at this and then reflecting and saying, oh, what I'm doing might be funny to me, but this person's already asked me to stop, and it's no longer humorous for the social emotional skills. There's several of these in this particular content, or in this particular resource. So again, that's this link down here. You can find several of them in the classroom media section of this resource, as well as all of the pieces that support this content that you could use to help build out that idea of that buddy system. Additional resources, and I would say specifically for your middle through high school, can be found in the health and phys ed section. So I'm going to go over here to show you where that is. So it's going to be under subjects, health and physical education. That's where we're at. So in here, you'll see that there is a personal, mental, and emotional health section, a self, family, environment, and society section, and a skills for healthy living section. So as you start to think about maybe middle school through high school, these might be sections that you would want to visit for those pieces. So you'll see mental and emotional health is in here, as well as personal health, relationships, safety, sexual health, substance misuse. I would highly advise you to make sure that you watch it ahead of time. And pay attention down here to the bottom. So this one in particular deals with 13+. That means it's facing to educators. So it's meant for educators to view that. So anything that says 13+ is educator facing, but some of these other ones, the idea of teaching kindness for kindness sakes from PBS, I think it's PBS NewsHour. These are really great. If you haven't seen Above the Noise, it's really, pretty appropriate for, I would say, your upper middle school in through your high school. Some of the concepts that they introduce could easily move into some of the content areas while it's labeled in kind of the social emotional area. This one in particular talks about data and longitudinal studies and what that means. So it does a great job of integrating some of those other ideas in with the social emotional learning. And again, there's always support materials. So there's a handout that goes with this for viewing notes as well. And you'll see it's not quite so Arthur or Daniel Tiger, which are definitely maybe oriented towards elementary school students.
It seems like our culture is obsessed with popularity. Almost every teen movie from at least the 1980s features some type of popular group. And today, it can feel like there's even more of a fixation on being well-liked than ever before. Wait. I only got 47 likes on my last Instagram post, but like, I just got my hair cut. I thought I looked good. So now I'm wondering, how does being popular in high school affect your life after you graduate? To answer this question, it's important to define popularity because there's more than one type. There's status, and there's likability. Status is what you probably think of when you play montages of teen movies in your head.
Tattoos are strictly foreboding. Sorry.
Wait, that was just me? But for real, it's those stereotypes you always see in the media, like the student body president, the head cheerleader.
So you get the idea. This is definitely a bit more advanced, and I would say probably more geared towards the high school area than maybe 6, 7, depending, but it depends entirely upon your students. So I really like the Above the Noise collection. That's definitely something you might want to check out if you're thinking for those age groups for resources and support materials to use. And when you do look at them, let's say taking a glance, I haven't logged in apparently today, but you will get the PA state standards when you choose your resource. I live very close to the Maryland state line. So now if I go over to my standards, it's still getting that way. Okay, so going back here, I found those under health and phys ed. So the next piece I want to talk about is on PBS Learning Media, but is also a PBS show that has been that has been shared several times. So if you haven't had a chance to watch the PBS American Portrait, I definitely think this is a resource, after you preview it, of course, that you could use with your high school students. And there are pieces of it, truthfully, I taught 7th and 8th grade, I would use with my 7th and 8th graders when I'm really thinking about the idea of social awareness and taking perspectives of others, perspective taking, and that idea of empathy, which can be so difficult to help students with as they age even. So this one in particular, the PBS American Portrait, has a PBS piece that's actually in the learning media, and then a piece, the other link down here is for the actual show. And they recently did a show here, I think it was in May when it came out, called In This Together, which actually is just a series of stories of how the coronavirus pandemic has affected America and brought us together. What I really like about this is it has that social media feel to it that I think a lot of our middle school and high school students like, where it's actually the people recording themselves with their cell phones and explaining things as they're happening. Like, I'm a first responder and this is what I have to deal with. So I highly suggest checking this particular piece out as well. So there's a whole section in collections for the PBS American Portrait. And you'll see that some of it can be done in segments, I think, but some of them are larger, like we are listeners, we are creators, we are witnesses. Now, again, I would pay attention to the bottom. It says 13 plus. Some of them might have some more mature materials, but these up here are 6 through 12, 6 through 12, 6 through 12, 6 through 12. So they're also in shorter segments, so you might just want to pull a segment to use. The most recent one is not in PBS Learning Media yet. The American Portrait is over on pbs.org. So this one is several perspectives from several people who are how they're dealing with the coronavirus, which could easily tie into that high school social emotional learning piece. And lastly, concerning American Portrait, if you weren't aware, students could actually create and submit their own reflections into the American Portrait. Now, I would encourage you, it's not for anybody under 13, and I would encourage you to make sure that you get parent permission if this is something you're thinking about, but also not just thinking about submitting it to the American Portrait, but how you could kind of create your own reflection piece that's like this in your classroom. So when you think about how these adults are sharing their stories as first responders, as parents, as people who are making masks, as people who are losing jobs and trying to find new jobs. So as they're starting to think about that piece, have them think about, okay, well, how can we share what's going on in our community, in our school, and share our stories of having to deal with the virus and potentially what school looks like and what learning looks like now. So I'm going to click out here so you have an idea of where it is in case you want to do a little extra research or a glance at it. And the idea behind the American Portrait is really that everyone has a story, and that it's up to us to share our own stories, which I think is an incredibly empowering message for our students when they may be in a situation where they feel helpless or hopeless, or that they're the only person having to deal with something in particular. So there's a synopsis in here. I'm not going to take too much of our time so that we can go in there, but I really do encourage you to go in and check it out. It is linked into the slide deck here on this particular slide, as well as those other two pieces I just showed you. And some of the last pieces I'm going to show you here are professional development pieces. They are educator focusing. So if you want to know more about the CASEL's competencies, which I shared here towards the beginning, there's an entire piece, an entire collection on social emotional learning with these competencies. That's this link right here, that you can go out, and there's several different videos that you can watch as an educator if you're not familiar with them. There is also a whole section on ACEs, which we didn't bring up today, which are adverse childhood experiences. And there's a little more research and information about that out there. So I'm just gonna mention it briefly if you're not familiar with ACEs, or if you are. There's also a family engagement piece, which Jen, we may have just a minute here. I'm going to click out.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, we don't have a lot of time, but this is a great resource for you to share with your families, your students' families and caregivers. And the website is so easy to navigate for them. So they have a section on shows. It's a collection of the PBS shows with activities and ideas based on those shows, so that you could go to Daniel Tiger and find activities based on that. Then they have Play, which offers a lot of engaging activities and things for families to do. And then they have a whole articles section, which is like good tips and suggestions on all areas of parenting and child development, practical and helpful tips. That is not designed to be overwhelming for parents. And then finally, they have this Learn and Grow section, which you can select subject areas, and you can see that they have topics of emotions and self-awareness, social skills, and character. And these also align with CASEL's 5 core competencies. So for example, you could go to a 6-year-old and select like emotions and self-awareness. And then it takes a little while sometimes. And then select like self-control or self-awareness, and you can see that there's tips and activities, suggestions related to that. That's for their age level. So it's extremely helpful. They also offer a great daily newsletter that comes in your email Monday through Friday that includes activities and connections, all themed to content areas. So lots of tips there. So it's a great, I use it all the time.
Resource. And I can even think about how you might use some of that in your classroom when you're looking for the self-awareness piece and you're looking for specifically something that will deal with that, going down here and looking more and saying, okay, we're going to do tic-tac feelings. So
exactly. Lots of activities related to specific teaching moments. And then also just wanted to let you know that each PBS station in Pennsylvania has learning at home and educational resources available for educators and families. And some of these resources are tailored to the specific needs of your region. Many of the stations are also working closely with their local IUs and school districts. So please check your local station's website for resources, activity guides, curriculum connections, and then share them with your students and families. Families can also subscribe to the local PBS station's newsletters. And then we wanted to just let you know that there's a great opportunity for K-2 teachers on social and emotional learning coming up next week. And it's sponsored by PBS, and the link is right there. It will be a week of professional learning, exploring strategies for naming, rating, and regulating emotions. So you can reflect on how those practices can be used with your early learners, regardless of their learning spaces that they're in. And then finally, on the horizon, just wanted to give you a heads up that in collaboration with the IUs and the PBS TV stations here in Pennsylvania, we're also working on an exciting project to promote social and emotional learning that help aid children in self-regulation tools through music. And this will also include elements of music appreciation. Local musician and songwriter Mr. Music has written 4 songs with different themes like on feelings and asking for help, and a number of them. And then we're going to have resources such as book suggestions, teaching and parenting tips, lesson plans, and activities, all to reinforce those SEL themes. So that's something to look forward coming up.
And because we're moving fast, I'm going to skip this in the chat, or because we're running over and I want to honor everyone's time. If you have questions that we didn't answer today, please do not hesitate to reach out and contact us. We would be happy to support you with whatever it is you're trying to do with our PBS learning media materials. And I definitely want to reach out and say thank you, Chris, so much for attending and coming and sharing with us today.
No, thank you. Thank you for putting this on. I was writing down resources that I wasn't aware of. So I'm happy that I have some of these now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
No problem. And thank you again to all of the educators out there.
Absolutely. You guys are doing the hardest work out there in education world.
Totally, exactly.
All right, thanks guys. I'm gonna linger here. I'm gonna stop the recording and stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has any questions they wanna throw in the chat, that is absolutely open for you guys.